Hello, my name is Josephine Jones and I direct programs in the Center for the Book for Colorado Humanities. I'm pleased to introduce you tonight to some of our staff. Everything that we do at Colorado Humanities is a team effort. And I'd particularly like to thank Abby Kerstetter for taking the lead on Colorado Book Awards in these challenging times, Chris Goff for her continued support, now as technical producer, our board of directors, Nora Ridgway, who's working behind the scenes tonight, and the army of volunteers who selected the finalist books. Although we are online this year, instead of snug together in the book bar, we can still purchase books through the book bar's website. Book Bar is our host for the readings and the celebration, and we'll gladly mail those books to you. And I know there's been talk of authors sending in book plates with signatures so you can have a signed copy of some of the titles. Our sponsors also continue their support. Denver-based Outskirts Press, a longtime sponsor of the Colorado Center for the Book, stands ready to help authors develop, publish, and market their books. And the Colorado Sun is also providing funding and is featuring weekly Sunlit excerpts and interviews from many of our Colorado authors' books. We want to thank them, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and all of you for being here. Let's all use hashtag Celebrate Story and hashtag Colorado Book Awards as we post about our experiences with the finalists and their work. I'm particularly pleased to introduce our MC for the evening. Adrian Soul Food Scholar Miller is the executive director of the Colorado Council of Churches, a food writer, former Politico, certified barbecue judge, and recovering attorney. He is the author of several books, including Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, and The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of the African Americans who have fed our first families, from the Washingtons to the Obamas. And that book was a 2018 finalist for the 2018 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work, Nonfiction, and the Colorado Book Award for History. His latest book, which I understand is going out in pre-sale right now, is called Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue. And it's set for release next week on April 27 from the University of North Carolina Press. Congratulations, Adrian, and welcome.
Thank you, Josephine. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this very spring-like day in Denver, right? Kind of chilly and stuff. So what better to do than to virtually curl up with a book with some great authors. So I'm very pleased to host tonight. And please know, if you're watching, after we hear from our authors, we will have Q&A. So if you have a question or some kind of a comment or anything, please go to the comment section, the chat section, and put your questions down, and we'll try to get to as many as we can tonight. So first, we will start with general nonfiction. Our first finalist is Sasha Geffen, who will read from their book, Glitter Up the Dark, How Pop Music Broke the Binary. Sasha is a journalist and critic based in Denver. Their work focuses on music and gender and has appeared in Pitchfork, Real Life Magazine, The Chicago Reader, Vulture, The New Inquiry, and The Fader. They have also been a staff writer at MTV News. I feel like I should do a guitar riff, but I don't have that ready, so we'll just turn it over to Sasha.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And I'm just really honored to be nominated and to be kicking this off. So I thought, since it's 5 years to the day since Prince left us, and it does, in fact, snow in April occasionally, I thought it might be good to read from the Prince chapter of my book, which goes from 50s and 60s up until the present. Prince is the only artist who gets his own chapter, and it felt like a good evening to honor him. So I will be reading from Chapter 6, Not a Woman, Not a Man, Prince's Sapphic Androgyny. It helped that he was short, with that forever young face and those big doe eyes. He was short even for a woman, 5'2", well under the contemporary human average, this writer's exact height. It meant that he could wear heels and stand next to his female bandmates without towering over them. He wore heels not to achieve a domineering stature, not for power and not for comedy. The shoes became him, effortlessly, with grace, as if they were a natural extension of his skeleton, as if they had always been there. Few artists have sustained such a totalizing androgyny for so long as Prince. The Minneapolis artist began making records at age 18, and even then he knew he needed total control over his sound, his look, his world. Prince Rogers Nelson signed a record deal with Warner Bros. When he was still a teenager, but he was hardly a wonderkind primed for exploitation. He knew what he wanted, and he would fight the industry's control tactics every step of the way to get it. In the first seconds of his 1978 debut album, Prince launches his voice skyward to an incandescent femininity. While many male singers at the time used falsetto for emphasis as a momentary break from a normal range, Prince flipped the template, casting falsetto as the primordial state of his voice. Drop the needle on For You for the first time, and Prince comes to you as an ethereal being, not a boy, not a girl, but something else. When he signed a 3-album deal with Warner, Prince insisted on complete creative control over his work, and the label gave it to him, a rarity among artists in general, to say nothing of a teenager from Minnesota who had yet to cut his teeth in the music business. Prince produced this minute-long opening title track of For You, layering his falsetto in waves, turning his delicate, expressive voice not just into a choir, but into a full band. His bass notes wobble like a bass guitar would, and his trebles coalesce into what could pass for a synthesizer. He introduced himself to the world not just as a singer and a songwriter, but as a whole environment of elastic sound. Throughout his prolific career, in the way he dressed, the way he held himself, and the way he sang, Prince chased androgyny. He called upon a rich tradition of Black dandyism in the music business. Soul stars James Brown and Rick James both donned flamboyant, gender-defying outfits on stage throughout the 70s, wearing shiny, skin-tight jumpsuits or brightly colored blazers as they sang. George Clinton, Bootsy Collins, and other members of the funk ensemble Parliament Funkadelic similarly took to the stage in fabulous get-ups, strapping on glittery angel wings and luxurious headdresses that complemented their music's Afrofuturism. But these outfits were clearly costumes, breaks from reality enabled by the stage. Prince, by contrast, seemed to integrate femininity deep into his own reality, seemed to carry it with him wherever he went. His androgyny wasn't something he could toggle on and off. It seemed to be a part of who he was, reflected not only in his clothes, but in his voice, his mannerisms, and his presence. On the title track to his 1982 breakthrough album, 1999, Prince waits to sing. His bandmate Lisa Coleman issues the first line, followed by guitarist Des Dickerson. Prince emerges as the third singer, and his voice synthesizes the voices of the woman and the man who've gone before him. It has both the crimped strain of Lisa's delivery and the sulky grain of Des's. It's not a man's voice or a woman's voice, but a fusion of the qualities often associated with each. In every aspect of his career, Prince delighted in that fusion. He found spiritual and artistic transcendence in letting himself be two or more things at once, and he followed that multiplicity into some of the most arresting pop songs of the past 50 years. In her poem, Minneapolistic, Rachel McKibbins recounts watching Purple Rain covertly on TV with her cousins at 3 a.m. She sees a window into her own budding queerness through Prince. Finally, there's a name and a face to reflect her forbidden desires, a figure marked by eyeliner that he shares with his love interest, and doe-eyed naivete. Your falsetto gospel rang our young queer souls awake, she writes. The poem is split into numbered quarters. The most concise and the most resonant, truest in its subject, is part 3, which in its entirety reads, "Boys will be boys unless they aren't." Thank you so much.
That was terrific, Sasha. Thank you so much. And now we will move on to our next finalists, who are Loretta Gilbert and Nancy Walker, and they will read from their book, Caregiving Done Differently, A Common Sense Approach for Families, Caregivers, and Seniors. Loretta Gilbert was on the Colorado Department of Health Assisted Living Advisory Committee and served as president of the Colorado Assisted Living Association. Her common sense approach to caregiving and helping seniors and families emerged from her unique life experiences. Nancy Walker learned to be flexible while managing change through working for various small businesses and global corporations. She found this flexibility and the common sense approach to caregiving both essential as she cared for her mother in her last 10 years. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. We're honored to be here along with the other finalists and to be able to share our book with you. This is a book for everyone. We talk about challenging issues that come up in everyday life for most of us. We wrote the book because we wanted to help people with a practical resource that would be helpful for families, seniors, and caregivers. Growing up on the Wind River Reservation and often riding my horse to school was such fun. We had great respect when the tribal elders visited our small two-room school. Listening to their stories was an honor and a privilege. Holding seniors in a place of honor was the natural way of life. In my early years, having lived on a farm on the reservation, I learned to start using a common sense approach to life. In the book, we talk about what I mean by a common sense approach. For example, one of the keys I learned was to honor the connection to all things, as it is the circle of life. Now, I'd like to share a story. We have many stories in the book, but this one is one that touches my heart. So, Sue woke up early one morning, and I was busy rushing around the house, cleaning and dusting and getting ready for breakfast and starting the day. When Sue came into the room, I turned on the TV since she enjoyed the morning programs. I continued to bustle around cleaning. After about 10 minutes, I had finished most of the chores. I took Sue a cup of coffee and sat down beside her. She leaned over and looked at me and said, "Thank God, honey, you're here. There's a mad woman running around the house." I realized that I was moving past her so quickly, she didn't recognize me. All of my movements had turned the motion into commotion. What was needed was a calm environment. And this is a true story.
And I'm going to read a little bit from the chapter on When You Are Concerned. One of the hardest things to witness is when a loved one's quality of life starts to decline. It might trigger different emotions in you, such as disappointment, regret, denial, resistance, or avoidance. You won't know exactly how you'll react or respond until it happens. So how do you prepare for the unexpected? How should you react? The answer is to consider starting a thoughtful conversation about the difficult what-ifs that lie ahead. This can be challenging. It might even be hard to know where to start. It takes a deliberate effort to have a realistic and honest conversation with family or involved loved ones. If something unexpected happens, do you know the wishes and expectations of your loved ones? It might be awkward or uncomfortable, but it's important to find a way to start a discussion and prepare for a family meeting to create a plan of action. We suggest each family members who will be involved take the time to talk with mom openly and compassionately. The initial conversation might be more comfortable with just one person rather than having everyone there. Begin with the issue that is of concern, such as a change in health or financial situation, if it's time to consider moving, or if more assistance is needed. If it is a parent or spouse, you probably already have a good idea as to their current mindset, such as if they're pragmatic, in denial, or unable to comprehend the situation. Tailor your words for the specific issue and be sensitive to their personality, temperament, beliefs, and situation. For example, "Mom, I'm concerned. I can see how much you're doing these days, and if Dad needs more assistance, I'm wondering what's going to happen. I want to be here to support you. If Dad gets to where he needs to move into assisted living, I think I would like you to think about moving in with me." There isn't only one way to have this type of a conversation, of course, but hopefully you know your loved ones well enough to know what approach will open the door to further discussion. Even a general question is, "How do you feel about your health and what's been going on lately?" Can give you an idea of what they're thinking. If "Why are you asking?" is a response, then you can move forward with the conversation. However, if the response runs more toward, I'm fine, I don't want to talk about it, then you know a different approach is needed. Conversations about finances can also be shut down. My finances are none of your business, or don't worry about me. If they're in denial and clearly don't want to talk about it, just let it go. If they're willing to talk, be encouraging and give them the time to share any concerns and feelings. Be aware that for seniors, many tears come easily. It's okay. Just be fully present with them and be supportive and gentle with your words. Compassion and hope play a vital role here. Be thoughtful as you consider how to approach the conversation and always keep the loved one's wishes above your own. You may need to adjust your approach based on the relationship with the person, the nature of the situation, and how open they are to discussing ideas. Why am I talking about this now? Because most of the heartache I've heard over the years comes from a general lack of communication. There's always a story. The families that don't talk about the adult dependent child who absorbs much of the senior's money, energy, and concern, or the family member who controls and delegates. But the senior won't speak up for fear of sparking a fight. I've listened to the frustrations and felt the anguish of the person who didn't get help or support from other family members and feels all alone. There are distinctive dynamics and personalities in every situation and every family, but the common thread is to find how problems can feel insurmountable when families are caught up in conflict. Everyone loves and everyone can lose when there is a family struggle instead of a focus on care for the loved ones. Now, just a little bit on caregiving. Being a caregiver takes a special person. A caregiver, knowingly or unknowingly, embraces the basics of psychology and works to understand the nuances of human nature. The caregiver's journey is one of compassion, personal growth, joy, sadness, exhaustion, and exuberance. The experience can be heartening, rewarding, and daunting all at the same time. It's not for everyone. Whether it is difficult or fulfilling depends upon your attitude and a common sense approach. The common sense approach requires an open mind, using realistic honesty and a compassionate understanding that the situations will always be changing. When you learn to do things differently, you'll find ways to be proactive for the next hurdle. Yes, it is hard, and it can be a shock to acknowledge that your vibrant parent or loved one now needs help. You may experience all kinds of emotional responses. The challenge is to keep learning and moving through your initial feelings. Part of the journey of a caregiver is learning how to broaden your perspective and how to see things from a different point of view. You learn to adapt to the new now when you accept that was then and now is now. Then you will be able to respond from the perspective of how things are today and not how they used to be. We thank you very much, and we're just very honored to be part of the group.
Shoot.
Thank you so much, Loretta and Nancy. We appreciate that. All right, before we go to our next author, remember, if you're watching for our authors, so please put your questions into the comment section, and we'll get to that after our next author. Who is, and he's our last finalist in the general nonfiction category. His name is Josh Hillis, and he will read from his book, Lean and Strong, Eating Skills, Psychology, and Workouts. Josh is the author of Fat Loss Happens on Monday, Habit-Based Diet and Workout Hacks. His work has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Men's Health, and the Denver Post. So take it away, Josh.
Hey, how's it going? So Lean and Strong, kind of an unusual book in the fitness world. The fitness world kind of has, like, on one side, there's like rigid diet rules, and on the other side, there's like intuitive eating. And Lean and Strong is kind of like in this messy middle place, like closer to intuitive eating, but not exactly intuitive eating. It's about mindful decision making about eating. It's about making mindful decisions based on your values. So a lot of the book is about clarifying your personal values and what matters to you, especially what matters to you in contrast to societal standards of beauty, right? So it's about it sets you up to make different kinds of decisions, considering your hunger and fullness levels, considering your emotional state, considering who you're with, considering where you're at. And so in contrast to diet rules, which are kind of like one thing that you like, one rule that you would have for all situations, this is really about giving you the tools to make different decisions in different situations, because food isn't quite that one-dimensional. It isn't just about fitness. It's about like connection and bonding and tradition and exploration and all kinds of things. So the title Lean and Strong, of course, lean is about the eating skills in the book, and strong is about strength training, but it also redefines lean as being economical, efficient, and agile in pursuit of your goals, and strong as doing what matters to you, even when it's hard. And that's where all the research on contextual behavioral science comes in, which is really, really my jam. That's actually my favorite part. And yeah, and so just like quick idea of what I mean by that, like the book might have like an eating guideline, which would be like pause 10 minutes before having a snack, or it might have an eating skill that pairs with that, like check in with your stomach. Do I feel a hollow feeling in the stomach, or am I fixated on one specific treat? So that like you've got to check in such that you can make a mindful decision from there. So I'm going to do a really short reading on perfectionism, because that's the thing that comes up, and it's one of my favorite topics. So, perfectionism versus excellence. There's some really interesting research that's been done on positive perfectionism versus negative perfectionism. They found out that there's no such thing as positive perfectionism. That perfectionism always has a negative outcome. Perfectionism is about shame, negative self-evaluations, and concern for mistakes. Perfectionism is distinguished by quitting and accompanied by lower well-being. You know, people are being perfectionists about their nutrition when anytime they blow their diet, they quit for the rest of the week or the rest of the month. Sometimes they quit for the rest of the year. Their perfectionism results in practicing a lot of quitting. On the other hand, let's look at pursuit of excellence. Pursuit of excellence is defined by practicing a skill, making mistakes, and then practicing some more. It represents understanding that excellence requires making mistakes to learn from them. Pursuit of excellence means that you keep practicing even after you make multiple mistakes and know that you will continue making mistakes. With workouts, pursuit of excellence might look like doing what you can whenever you can. It could be full workouts sometimes and half workouts others. Could be working out 3 times a week sometimes and 1 or 2 times other times. It's continuing to get into workouts even when those aren't as often or as long as you might like. The turning point here is to notice when you're having perfectionist thoughts. It's okay to have perfectionist thoughts. It's just not acting on them by quitting completely. You notice those thoughts, but you practice your eating skills and you keep doing your workouts. Perfectionism versus self-compassion. It turns out the primary difference between perfectionism and the pursuit of excellence is self-compassion. Self-compassion is what determines whether our pursuits will build us up or destroy us. Perfectionism has everything to do with living in this fantasy land where we can do everything perfectly. It'd be cool if that were possible, but we aren't robots. So we're humans, and humans make mistakes, and humans feel bad sometimes. Humans are, by nature, imperfect. Perfectionism is an unwillingness to do the work when confronted with our own humanity. It's abdicating responsibility anytime we see evidence of being human. Self-compassion is acknowledging that it's normal to make mistakes. It's normal to have all kinds of emotions. It's normal to have cravings for different things. It's even normal to make mistakes and then later feel guilty about them. Self-compassion is noticing that all of our judgments about ourselves are just thoughts. And it's noticing that we've had judgmental thoughts maybe for decades. It's learning that we don't need to debate those thoughts. We don't need to figure out if they're true or false. We don't need to fight or change them. And we don't need to repeat them over and over again and beat ourselves up. Self-compassion is noticing that these are just thoughts and forgiving ourselves when they show up. So in this, self-compassion is continuing to practice reading skills and workouts simply because they're self-care. Self-compassion is also reminding ourselves that no matter how together everyone else looks on the outside, everyone has human issues. Everyone has different difficult and easy things, but everyone does have hard things. And everyone makes mistakes, and we're human. Thanks. Oh, there were a bunch of citations, and there were about 15 citations in there, but I didn't put them in text. I footnoted them, so it didn't make sense to cite them orally. But if you're into that, there's plenty of those.
Josh, I think it was a good move not to cite all the footnotes, but thank you so much. That was great. All right. So let's bring back all of our general nonfiction authors for a little Q&A. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the comment section, and we'll get to them as best we can. So my first question is for Sasha. What does it sound like when doves cry?
I don't know. A little bit like how it feels when it snows in April, I guess. I think we're all still working to find out.
Yeah.
Our work here's not done.
Yep. All right, Josh. With so many differing approaches to health and fitness, how did you navigate such a vast field of research when writing your book?
That's a good question. Man, that's a huge question. I sort of narrowed in on a couple different things. Contextual behavioral science is kind of like my research area. And so I spent a lot of time looking at it from that perspective. And while I did combine over the other things I did take some stuff from intuitive eatings and some stuff on mindful decision making and things like that. I was able to use that to kind of like narrow it down to here's where I'm going. I also borrowed a little bit from self-determination theory, but I used a very specific bias. Actually, I'm going to come from this place.
Gotcha. And just real quick, I want to make sure I'm processing something you said. You talked about what goes into what you eat and food habits and things like that. And you talked about the person you're with. So are you saying breaking up with somebody is a weight loss plan? You don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that. I will move on to Loretta and Nancy. So, Loretta and Nancy, your writing and area of interest has largely been influenced by personal experience. How did you balance research with that experience? And did you ever come across instances where the research didn't match up with what you experienced? And if so, how did you handle those discrepancies when putting together your book?
Well, of course, we run across some of that, but our experience came from just things that happened in our lives. It was, from having an assisted living facility and Nancy taking care of her mother. So when things didn't match up, that's when we used realistic, the common sense approach, which I have to think about that question some more.
Then I'll just jump in real quick as you think of that. So I'll do quite a bit of, well, there's this and there's this and there's this, and we would talk, constantly, and it would be very interesting because every time I started going down one avenue, then Loretta with the common sense approach, and we just navigated. Well, in that instance, you would be handling it differently, and so our whole thing was about how to handle things differently from based on there's all the research, but very individualized.
And I think one of the other things too was to realize that was then and now's now. So there was a lot that went into that because we had to experience it ourselves with situations in our own lives, and then with others and in the facility. And then we encouraged other people to do that, to look at, that was then, that was the person they were. But this is now, things have changed.
In our whole focus, because it's not a medical book and we're not medical professionals. So we were coming at it from there's that area that if you needed the medical, you would of course be working with your medical professionals. But we're talking about the everyday things that everyone encounters. And, we just don't talk about it. That's just the thing. It's like, I don't want to talk about that now or whatever, but the importance of planning of talking about it, bringing the elephant in the room, talking about all that stuff. So that's kind of where we would build on the research. We would build on the new statistics. I mean, just speaking of statistics, by 2030, which is only 9 years away, 1 out of every 5 U.S. citizens is going to be 65 years or older. So, they call it, the silver tsunami. Things are changing, and so we wanted to get into that approach of let's start now. Let's start the conversation.
Let's be proactive.
Be proactive.
All right, we have one question from the audience. We will have one from Patricia. So when I ask you that, for Loretta and Nancy, I'd like to know how you got together for this collaboration. Have you known each other a long time?
Yes, we have. And I knew Nancy's mother before, and Nancy was working in another city. So yes, we both, when Nancy started caring for her mother,
I moved back.
She moved back and started caring for her mother.
I was on the phone 3-4 times a day. Should I be concerned? Should I be worried? I'm seeing things I have never seen before. And it just built from there.
Okay. And now that you've, this is a question from me. Since you've now collaborated on a book together, do you still like each other? Never mind.
Yes.
Yes. All right. We have a question. I'm glad the answer is yes. Sasha, we have a question for you before we move to our next category. What was the most surprising find, be it an influence or connection or fact about some musician from your the research for this book?
One surprising find was that 2 really important DJs to kind of the development of electronic music, Frankie Knuckles and Larry Levan, were both in the New York drag scene before they became electronic music DJs. And so they were going to drag balls, they were part of drag houses. And so that was, I always knew that like house music was like a queer music. But to see that connection so directly from ballroom to house and garage was really delightful to discover.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks again for being with us tonight, and we will bring you back when we have questions for everybody. But thank you for your readings. So now we will move on to our history finalists. And our first history finalist, unfortunately, was not able to make it tonight, but we still want to celebrate him. So I will read his bio as if I was going to introduce him to speak. So over the course of his long career as a writer, magazine editor, and historian, Jeffrey B. Miller, no relation, has started 6 magazines. He is the author of Stapleton International Airport, The First 50 Years, and the co-author of Facing Your 50s, Every Man's Reference to Midlife Health. His books, Behind the Lines in 2014 and World War I Crusaders in 2018, were named Kirkus Best Books of the Year. That's quite impressive. If he was here tonight, he would have read from his latest book, Yanks Behind the Lines, How the Commission for Relief in Belgium Saved Millions from Starvation During World War I. So we're sorry that Jeffrey couldn't join us tonight, but we have 2 other finalists who are here, and I will introduce our next finalist, and that is Jeri Norgren. Jeri has spent most of her life exploring Colorado's mountains as a member of the Denver Fortnightly Club. She has authored numerous papers on various topics, including the one that grew into Colorado's highest, the history of naming the 14,000-foot peaks. Jeri, it's all yours.
Thanks, Adrian. I'm a 5th-generation Coloradan and came upon a little-known slice of Colorado mountain history completely by accident. As a member of a 140-year-old women's literary organization, I am forever learning something new in the papers that are presented. During one of our meetings 4 years ago, the president was delving into the club's archives to share interesting tidbits with us. One such item was a newspaper account which reported that our club had been instrumental in having the name of Mount Rosalie changed to Mount Evans. Little did I know that that simple sentence would change the course of my life for the next few years. I was so curious about this name change that I set out on a mission to discover everything I could about it, especially because at one time this prominent Front Range 14er had originally been named for a woman. While researching the Mount Rosalie name, I came across other naming stories which piqued my curiosity, and I began a journey to uncover all of the 58 14er stories. Initially, I was doing it just for me because I do love a good research challenge. After 2.5 years of research, the information I had collected told me it wanted to become a book. I was surprised that this little known piece of Colorado history had never been told before and set about figuring out how it could become a book. I knew what I had was an important piece of Colorado history, a piece never before written in its entirety. I thought of John Fielder and his beautiful images of our mountains and left it at that. It was just a thought. Until one day, while waiting in an office lobby, I saw on the behemoth that was their coffee table one lone book, one of John's I had never seen before. Well, if that wasn't a sign, I don't know what would be. I contacted him, and after a few days of discussions, we agreed on the book. We signed our contract last year at the beginning of March when then the COVID lockdown hit, which actually proved to be the perfect scenario for being able to write and produce a book in such a short time. I wrote every single day for 9 weeks. It was a brutal schedule, but since no one was going anywhere, it was also the perfect schedule. In the following excerpt from one of the Peak's naming stories, you will get an idea of some of the thought processes that went into choosing a name for a peak. In the 1860s and 70s, government surveyors played an important role in documenting the geology, geography, botany, and zoology of Colorado, and the man best known for contributing more to the knowledge of Colorado than any other surveyor was Ferdinand Hayden, geologist in charge of the Hayden Survey. Since these men worked for the United States government, it stands to reason they would honor our nation's capital in any way they could. The following tale of the naming of Snowmass Mountain will illustrate some of the initial ideas and give you a glimpse into what some of our loftier peaks could have been named. Snowmass Mountain at 14,099 feet is the 33rd highest in the state. Located between Capitol Peak and the Maroon Bells in the Elk Mountains, this peak was given several names before one was actually decided upon. In an 1873 article for the American Journal of Science and Arts, Ferdinand Hayden explains one of these names. 3 miles further south of Capitol Peak is another great peak, only about 50 feet lower, which we call the White House, from the conspicuous snowfield about a mile in horizontal breadth and having a slope of half a mile, which covers its eastern front. This snowmass is by far the largest we have found in the mountains of Colorado and distinctly marks and characterizes the peak. This name was in keeping with the original idea to christen the Elk Mountains the National Mountains. The survey's topographer, Henry Gannett, refers to the peak by a different name in the 1874 survey report. 2 3/10 miles farther south of Capitol Peak on the main ridge is a summit which has been named Snowmass Mount. This also is one of the highest summits in the system, being slightly inferior to Capitol Mountain in elevation. It has received its name from the immense field of snow on its eastern face. This snowfield in August, which is the month when there is the least amount of snow in the mountains, had an area of fully 5 square miles. Probably, this is the nearest approach to a glacier in the Rocky Mountains. William Newton Byers, editor of the Rocky Mountain News, often accompanied the Hayden expedition in Colorado and wrote in his newspaper about his adventures. His August 17, 1873 article suggests yet several more names for the mountain. We broke camp this morning and started for the great central peak of the range, the extreme western object of our present ambition. Later, it was given the name White Bison, and later still White House. What will be the final decision is now uncertain, but we incline to the name first proposed, Snowmass, because it is the only mountain we have that is uniformly white all the year upon its face. Byers continues to ruminate on the name of the peak and the range in his article a few days later when he says, the name White House has been settled upon in honor of the House of the President. Another lofty peak nearby is to be named Capitol. Some of its silver-ribbed neighbors will doubtless be named Treasury and then will follow Cabinet, Post Office, etc. In fact, before we left the Sawatch Range, a proposition to call this wonderful group of cloud-piercing peaks the National Mountains was seriously entertained and discussed. Had that been done, the plan would have been to represent each department in the national government by a like name to as many of the loftiest summits. Hayden prior to considering that the Elk Mountains be named the National Mountains, he entertained the idea of calling the Sawatch Range the National Range. Neither suggestion stuck due to the fact that the local people already had established names for these ranges. The survey eventually decided upon the name Snowmass as the best name for this peak. On August 7th, buyers accompanied the surveymen on the first official ascent of Snowmass, and it was also the first recorded ascent of any 14er in the Elk Mountains. Byers entertains his readers with some of the details of the climb. The climb was made in from 2 to 3 hours by different members of the party. On the summit, we found the scientific men who had been from 3 to 4.5 hours making the ascent. They had unwisely started up from the west, which aided in the difficulty of their climb. Mr. Gardner, the geographer with the survey, had pronounced it the most dangerous climb he had ever made, and several times he considered his life in great jeopardy. 3 times his attendant saved him from falling backward by planting his tripod against his back. On one of the large snowbanks was a grizzly bear, and he stayed during the day. Sometimes he was leisurely sauntering about, then rolling over in the snow. Next, he would take a lunch of grasshoppers and then sit upon his haunches and watch the party. Byers considered the view from the top well worth the climb. From this story, you will get an idea of the thoughts that went into the names of the geographic features in the mid-1800s, thoughts very different from those today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jeri, for that reading. Appreciate it. All right, we have one more reading in our in this category of history. And please, if you have questions, put them in the comments, because we'll have questions for our history finalists, and then we'll bring all the authors back and ask them some questions. So our finalist now is Randi Samuelson-Brown, and is the author of The Beaten Territory, a historical fiction novel. Originally from Golden, she now lives in Denver. Tonight, Randi will be reading from her book, The Bad Old Days of Colorado, Untold Stories of the Wild West. Randi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Like everybody else has said, I am very grateful to be chosen a finalist, and it's really been a fun evening listening to everybody and what their entries are. So that is awesome. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about why I wrote this book. Like Jeri, I also have deep roots in Colorado, and my father was absolutely fabulous on Colorado history. So when we were take trips anywhere in the state, he would always know the background of, oh, that hill over there, there was like a battle there, and, just really great stories. And as I got older, I kind of wanted to make sure, I wanted to try to preserve Colorado's history the way that my parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents might recognize some of those stories before they get totally lost, with the passage of time. And I think this is also my contribution for the people who are moving into the state, so that they can kind of see, just some of the stuff that we all grew up with that I really do think shapes Coloradoans' characters. So for my choices of reading tonight, I do want to say The Bad Old Days of Colorado is not Coloradans' stellar behavior, but rather more the deviant people. It's more about difficulties, greed, violence, you kind of name it. We were pretty wild, so part of the Wild West. So here is out of Denver's Hardscrabble Beginning. Here's a picture of one of the hanging trees. Whoops. Denver actually did have hanging trees, and there are a few pictures remaining of them. A hard journey. There was no easy way to get to Denver, and the plains were perilous. The overland trail provided the main route, hazardous as it may have been. It was on the overland that the early Denver citizen Libius Barney traveled. A self-described dupe regarding Colorado's abundant riches, Barney wrote of his early adventures for a Vermont newspaper called the Bennington Banner. When the first stagecoaches of the Leavenworth and Pikes Express crossed the plains, Barney was one of the passengers, and he recorded that crossing faithfully. From his early accounts, game was plentiful, so were rattlesnakes. Hardships abounded. Tellingly, he wrote of immigrants who traveled with disastrous results. Our mules gave out this afternoon, and we were compelled to walk the last 12 miles to the station, where we arrived at 8 o'clock. Here we found about 50 immigrants who came via Smoky Hill route, and they were indeed objects of compassion. Some of them started with horses, some with mules, and some with oxen, but the most of them were now without either, their teams having been deprived of food and water perished, and their wagons were burned to cook with. Many were sick and sought shelter from the frosty nights beneath their few remaining wagons. Full 300 miles from any house, without fuel, save a scanty supply of wild sage, and destitute in almost every particular, it is not to be wondered at that they should all repent and even curse the day their folly sent them on this desperate chase for filthy gold. One of the lady immigrants here became a mother. Her child lived but a few hours, was buried upon the margin of a convenient brook, from which this circumstance has taken the name Infant Creek. So that is like one example of the severe hardships crossing the plains into Denver to get to the gold occurred. I have another pretty funny letter, another dupe wrote back, and let me go ahead and read this. Prices were high, nearing exorbitant. Supplies required transport across the same dangerous and arduous routes the immigrants traveled. The rough settlements along Cherry Creek were described by an anonymous writer of the time. Signing his letter as T, he wrote to St. Louis's Missouri Republican the following description, which was published on July 9, 1859. Men are perfectly wild and crazy. Gambling and whiskey drinking flourish here extensively. Tanglefoot whiskey sells for 25 cents a drink and would almost make a man shed his toenails. I find a much better town here than I expected. Denver and Auraria, taken collectively, make quite a large place. I will write you again soon if I do not immediately come home. One wonders what became of T and whether he stuck it out or turned around then and there. But whether he stayed or not, liquor remained in full glory. Indeed, spirits consumed in the unseasoned Denver during 1859 were barely fit for consumption and were the topic of many discussions. All early theorists, and that of practical judges too, agreed that whiskey Denver consumed in her youthful days was of an exceedingly bad quality. It was colored and otherwise doctored to suit the fiery tastes of various grades of customers. It retailed from bottles bearing popular nicknames, one virgin barrel usually serving as the base for all these operations. The customary retail price in 1859 for all qualities, none of them good, was 25 cents a drink. Whiskey was at the bottom of most of the frequent brawls and fights. The popular nicknames give a good indication of the quality, if not the ingredients. Coffin varnish, family disturbance, rot gut, or Taos lightning. None of it could be considered good. Once again, there was money to be made upon the proclivities of others. As such, it stands to reason that some of the largest and most important buildings constructed in the early days were saloons. So that is part of our drinking culture that we still see today. So it kind of makes me laugh. And then on to gambling. Games of chance were often rigged. Step right in and don't be shy. It was pick your poison as far as gambling dens went. The Palace Theater, the Arcade, and Murphy's Exchange, locally known as the Slaughterhouse for obvious reasons, were fine places to offload money. The Slaughterhouse was a favorite of the sporting fraternity, the shifty, and the desperate. Then came the Gin Mill, the Chicken Coop, Gin Thornton's Place, and the Missouri House, which pretty much rounded out the Larimer Street offerings of note. On Curtis Street stood the Morgue, a gambling hell, the Hog Wallow, and the Clifton House. Ed Chase would later open the Inner Ocean Club on Curtis in a former mansion whose rooms were so jumbled and layout was so confusing that during raids, evidence often disappeared before the police could find it. And that's just a sampling of Denver. So, as I said, this is kind of more the harder accounts of Colorado. One of the interesting things I did find when I was doing the research is it's everybody who we think of associated with the Wild West basically rolled through Denver at one point or another. So that was really interesting. the Earps were here. Wyatt Earp and one of his brothers. Doc Holliday died in the state. Let's see, Bat Masterson was a sheriff of Trinidad. I mean, the list goes on and on. Even Calamity Jane reportedly owned a restaurant with one of her husbands at some point, either in Boulder or Arvada. So there's a little bit of flux there. So thanks. It's kind of a Colorado book. And yeah, thank you for having us all.
Well, thank you, Randy, for that. So let's bring back Jeri as well, and we'll have questions for our history finalists. So, Randy, let me ask you the first question. Where did you look to find these stories, these quote unquote untold stories?
Some of them, actually, it started up as I started looking at known stories and then realized that like in the 1950s or 40s, some historians kind of made up some of the gloss on it. And it turned out not to be true. Some of them I knew from my family. Others, when I'd go to book signings, one of the funniest ones is about a race between a prostitute and a foot racer up in Georgetown. That is not coming out of my family, but you know what? This old guy told me the story. His dad told him, and he's like, now who would make a thing like that up? And it's like, I don't know, but it's really interesting. So yeah, I just talked to lots of people, lots and lots of people, and tell them from Colorado, they're from Colorado, and they just, you know, Jeri probably knows, they just start talking and telling you stuff, you know. So that's how I found a lot of it. And I'm a research nerd. So, you know, you hang out in the library, the 5th floor, you start hearing stuff, you know, and it's just fun reading newspapers from the time. Great source.
Yeah, I do a lot of historical writing myself, and old newspapers are such a boon because, you know, they're trying to capture the daily life of a community. And so they often give a lot more detail about stuff than you would ever find in a book. So
yeah. And also like the Denver Post used to be kind of like a yellow newspaper, you know, kind of like today's Enquirer or what have you. So it's not like high journalistic standards, but it's dang entertaining. So
yeah. We do have a question for you from the audience, from Patricia. And the question is, are you planning to write more fiction?
Yes, I am. I do love fiction and I love nonfiction. I'm working on a story about a clairvoyant, a mining swindle, and a fresh start that takes place in Cripple Creek. So just need to find a publisher, finish it up. Yep.
So if a clairvoyant is involved, you already know the ending?
No. The ending is like really hard on this one. It's just like, oh, what am I going to do?
Gotcha. All right, Jeri, question for you. Now, this is not meant to attack your street cred on the subject, but the question is, have you climbed all of Colorado's 14ers?
No, Adrian, I have not climbed them.
Okay. Well, of the ones that you have climbed, how much of that personal experience made it into your book? And do you strive for a strictly objective historical approach when you write?
It was just strictly a historical approach. And as Randy said, I spent a lot of time on that 5th floor as well, and up at the National Archives and History of Colorado and the USGS Library and the American Alpine Library in Golden. And as Randy said, the newspapers, and you too, Adrian, reading those old newspaper accounts. I found out so much information from those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah. I'm just curious, was there a particular newspaper that you found really helpful?
Well, yeah, the William Newton Byers, his accounts, because he gave himself a name. He called himself the Mountain Tramp, and anybody that came to the state and was interested in the mountains, he would be their escort, and he would follow the Hayden survey around, like a lot of the summer, and then write articles for the newspaper about it. So his stories were fascinating, and he was a wealth of information.
Okay. I did not know that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's bring back all of our authors and ask a few more questions before we call it a night. All right. I think we got everyone. Okay. So we do have a question from the audience for Josh from Nora. So how did you first become interested in your research about health, eating, and exercise?
So my original background was personal training, and it was just one of those things where most of the clients that hired me wanted to lose weight, and so I looked into like how to make a difference. That workouts kind of didn't get people all the way there. Nutrition clearly was a big issue, but I worked with companies that provided meal plans, and I could see that wasn't like that kind of worked for some people, but not others. And the people that it worked for, I couldn't tell if it was like really making their life better. and so I got really interested in how do I make a difference for more people, and how do I have the difference that I make include their well-being also. Right. And so that's what led me to studying psychology. And that's why I was so focused on eating behavior versus like nutrition, or specific diet, things like that.
Got you. Okay. So there wasn't a mean gym teacher in your childhood? I was just
There totally was. But
all right. Gotcha. All right. Well, I have a question for everyone. And so I'm just going to kind of go, I'm going to call on you if you could spend like maybe 1 or 2 minutes giving an answer so we can make sure we hear from everyone and maybe take on some more questions. But the question for everyone, and this is from Natasha, is how has the Colorado community helped you get to where you are as an author? So I'm going to start with you, Jeri.
Oh. How has it? Well, I have to say, first off, it's the research. It's the libraries, especially the 5th floor of the Denver Public Library. Those people are so helpful, and a lot of them have worked there for years, and all supportive. And you just tell them what it is you're researching and, what book it is you're planning to write or whatever. And they're just all in on trying to help you. And I, felt totally supported with those people when I went there. So, and the other libraries were the same way too, but the 5th floor really stands out.
Great. Okay. How about you, Randi?
I kind of made like a deal with the universe, which just sounds totally woo-woo, but it's like if I started getting published, I made a plan that I would speak at every library or every regional museum that asked me to speak at there if I humanly could. So when the Beaten Territory came out pre-COVID, I was like all over the place. So I feel very supported by the states. It is important to me that small towns and small museums do have authors come in or people talking about history to give them to share with them, keep everything vibrant. I have been incredibly fortunate by the support I've gotten from people, institutions in the state of Colorado. You know what? We always like to look at our own past too. So in a way, it's kind of like, hey, let's talk about us. So I've been fortunate.
Great. All right, Sasha.
So I started writing the book about a year after I first moved to Colorado, and I don't think I would have been able to finish it anywhere else. I think just like that shift to I moved from Chicago, and that shift to the state was really healthy for me mentally and connected me with a lot of really wonderful people. I've been going to workshops at the Lighthouse Writers Workshop over the past couple of years. I've started holding some workshops there myself recently, which has just been incredible. It's really wonderful to be connected with so many other people who are interested in learning about reading and writing. So I think that's been a lovely development over the past couple of years since I became a transplant to this wonderful state.
Thank you. Okay, Loretta and Nancy.
So we have actually had, I think, phenomenal support by so many different organizations here in Colorado. I think we have a wonderful network in Colorado that supports authors. And between all the wonderful libraries, I feel the same. I mean, I love libraries. I've been to many of them, and for the different research, and you always get different things. And the organizations that we've dealt with, because we're both Denver based, in Denver and also up in Colorado Springs, that every time I've reached out for any of the different organizations, the response has just been supportive and positive. And anytime you talk to other authors, it's just wonderfully supportive. I think Colorado has a phenomenal support system for writers.
And Loretta?
And I agree. Since this is our first time, at writing a book, and we've reached out to all the libraries and the different places, it has been really great to have this support.
Great. How about you, Josh?
Metro, man, MSU Denver. Like, it's all about my statistics and research methods professors, like Dr. Erickson, Dr. Rocheleau, Dr. Flynn, also the honors department, and also the Rocky Mountain Association of Contextual Behavioral Science. I've just had like a lot of really, really cool mentors, a lot of really cool professors.
All right. Great. Well, it sounds like all of you have friends. So my personal question to you is, what's that like? All right, never mind. So next question for all of you is, when you thought about this particular book that you wrote, did you begin with a particular question, or was it really a broader subject of interest that compelled you to write this book? And some of you have already kind of answered this, but if you could elaborate on that as well. So I'll start with Sasha.
For sure. I feel like the book kind of naturally evolved out of some of the music journalism and record reviewing I was doing shortly before I started writing it. So very much a view of the present, of looking how gender nonconformity and trans identity kind of fell so hand in hand with artists having really exciting sounds or pushing the boundaries of genre forward at the same time. So I just kind of wanted to dive into the historical roots of that link. And it kind of unspooled naturally from there. So I would say it's more of like a reverse chronological development. I think it was a phenomenon I was noticing in the present, and I just dug into some of its origins.
Okay. I got to tell you, just personally, I am so fascinated by music writing. That's just some of the most compelling writing I come across. And I find myself drawn to it very much. And I'm not a musical guy. So thank you. All right, Randi, how about you?
I think I definitely am interested in historical preservation, old buildings and all of that. And I have been forever. So my heart kind of bleeds like when some beautiful building disappears. And so I think that is one of the things that kind of pushed me into writing The Bad Old Days of Colorado, true with the bad slant that maybe my relatives aren't so grateful that I explore so deeply. But, I think I just feel this big urge or rush to like try to preserve what I can before it gets lost in time. So that was really my main idea about it.
Okay. I don't know if it's so true these days, but I remember talking to somebody in the early 2000s, and they were from another community. I think it was Dallas, and they were jealous of Denver because so much of our old buildings were still there, in the 70s, and said there was this push to just knock down everything. And so they were really jealous that we still had so many buildings that could be turned into lofts and other things. So I feel young.
I'm grateful it's gone the way it has, but we've still lost some kind of good ones. But you know what? Some of the time things just fall down. I get it. But the stories need to stay.
Yes, there you go. All right, Jeri, how about you?
What Randi said, I'm really into the history and into preservation. My mom was a big preservationist here in Denver. And when I came across, it was by accident, as I talked about how I came to be doing all this research on the naming of the 14ers and the first descents, and then realized it had never been done. And like Randi, it was just so important to me to get the history out there so it wouldn't get misconstrued and lost. So that was my driving force to get it out there so people would see, so people would know. And when people don't know things, they tend to make up things. Which is not so good for the history either. So that's why I felt it was important to get it out there.
No, I hear you on that one. I did not know we had a White House in Colorado. So thank you.
We don't. They renamed it.
They renamed it?
Yeah. And yeah, but that just went into some of the thought when the surveyors were here. They really, they didn't just throw a name at a peak. They really had a thought process behind the whole thing. So no, White House ended up getting its Snowmass Mountain now.
Okay. Was it because they didn't like the president in office at that time? Or?
No, they did. So they were government surveyors, and they worked for the government and they revered the government. And so that was their idea of calling it the National Range, and naming the highest peaks after buildings in Washington, D.C. That was to honor the government.
Okay.
So,
gotcha. All right. Cool. Thank you. All right, Josh, how about you? Particular question or broad subject of interest?
Couple things. The first one was that I realized that what me and some of my friends and some people I'd worked with were doing was different from what was out there. Was that we were teaching like hunger and fullness cues, but we're also putting a lot of structure to that that no one else really was. And then I found some really cool research on emotional eating, and like how like changing thoughts and suppressing cravings like didn't work, but it was more counterintuitive, and how like the things that were most counterintuitive and most popular were things that actually increased emotional eating. That there were other things that that there were better ways that just isn't written about a lot popularly. And so I was like, I gotta get this out there.
Yeah.
So
yep, I understand. All right, Loretta and Nancy, how about you?
Well, our book started out to be an Alzheimer's book, but as we kept writing over the years and talking about it, it morphed into something that we felt would be helpful for everybody. And we started with using the common sense approach, but also looking at everything with realistic honesty and hope. We took what worked for us and all the experiences and the stories we had that are in the book that are true. And we looked at all this and thought, this could be helpful for other people. This is a path that we took, and we lived many of these things. In the assisted living home, I saw many of these things happen. So our experience comes from personal experience. And what worked, sometimes things worked, and when they didn't, we took the time to work it out and to figure what is best. And we felt that this would help other people. And this is how the book came about, in our need and love to help other people. I'd lived around seniors all of my life, so I had a strong urge to help the seniors, their families, and caregivers, because it's so important. And to show them that there is a different approach that we can take. So it is different. And sometimes we, as in this business, don't talk about the really difficult issues and what affects the seniors, what affects the families. And so in the book, we do talk about the difficult issues and and we give guides, and this is why the stories are important. And so that's how we started.
Okay, Nancy, did you want to add anything?
I think she said it all.
Okay, great. All right, so the last question, because I don't see any more questions from the audience. So my last question is kind of an Alice in Wonderland question. So you all do a lot of work and research to come up with these books. So how do you keep from going down the rabbit hole? You know, how do you let go? Well, in Jeri's case, how do you stop trying to reach the summit? So Loretta and Nancy, tell us about, when did you feel like you had enough to tell this story? Because I think a lot of authors grapple with this, right?
We started writing notes and, about all the different things that happened. And I don't know because that we have written everything we want to say, because we keep thinking we should have added this to the book. We should have, this one more thing happened and we thought about it and we should put that in the book. So
and we're like, oh, this is so important. This has to go at the front of the book. And then, oh no, this is so important. This has to go in the front of the book. This has, yes. it's hard not to go down the rabbit hole because it's all important.
Right, it is. So we had a hard time deciding what to say tonight because we thought everything was important.
Gotcha.
And it would make life so much easier for families if they were all on the same page and we write about this. And family dynamics are huge. We go into when there's family that are in conflict. This has an effect on the person that's sick or the senior. And so we talk about this and we give them things that they can do. This is not a medical book. This is not. We always encourage everyone, work with your medical professionals. But this is a common sense approach. And this I brought from the beginning was from the reservation and my life there, because you had to have a common sense.
Yeah.
And so it was great. So the book came from that, and
We probably had 5 books and we had to whittle it down because
that was hard.
Okay, thank you. So Josh, you know, how do you hold back at the intellectual buffet? You got so many choices. So
It's hard. It's really, really, really hard. I don't know if I did a great job of that. I think there might be too much in there. You know, I mean, like my process is I write a book and then I throw it away and I start over, and like that teaches me how to structure it. And then I knew that there would be like 5 sections of the book, and then I filled that out. And then my editor's like merciless, and that's helpful because I can override it. And so by the 3rd version, I got something where I could like really start, and like that I went from there.
gotcha. Okay. Jeri, how about you?
Well, I enjoyed going down the rabbit holes because going down these different rabbit holes brought me to more information. And like Nancy and Loretta, I ended up with, 5 books worth of material. And but I'd be researching on one of the peaks names, and I'd see a footnote or a different article that would take me to another peak. And that from that method, the rabbit hole method, I amassed just a great amount of information on all these peaks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Randi.
I lived in the rabbit holes.
I know.
Like, you show me a rabbit hole and I'm down it. I do think with the process of writing a nonfiction, however, I was a history major, and so the way that I did my book for this publishers, we had to write like 2 or 3 chapters and kind of have the whole outline, about everything's going to happen. And when it's going to happen in the book. So that kind of gave me a structure that I needed to follow. But you know what? I deviated. So it was fun.
Gotcha. All right, Sasha, I think you have the last word.
Well, I think I'm still in the rabbit hole sometimes. But I don't know. I originally sent a pitch to my publisher that would have been for a book that was twice as long or twice as broad as what I eventually turned in. And I think just limiting the time period that I researched, and also like having a word count cap and a deadline to hold myself to, like obviously all those things helped. I kind of forced myself to write the book very quickly because that's just how it's my first book and that's how I'm used to writing shorter things. So I just tried to like apply that more broadly. And it kind of worked. Just like the hard limits kept me from going too long on any one thing. But I also ended up keeping my focus largely to the music that I already loved, or that I found like a newfound love for. And a lot of it was really just effective in that way, just chasing down what felt good and focusing on that.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, it was wonderful to get to know all of you and hang out with you for a minute. So thank you for letting me be your cruise director tonight. Enjoyed your books, and I hope people will pick them up and support you and learn a lot. So I will turn it now back to Josephine.
Thank you, Adrian. I am so appreciative of your writing and all you do for Colorado Humanities and the many communities you serve. I want to thank the writers tonight. As you can imagine, I've attended a few of these finalist readings, and every one of them I am rapt. And tonight, I wish we could all grab a glass of wine at the book bar, and I'll tell you some stories about how I can relate to each of your works so deeply. So thanks for the gifts that you're bringing to Colorado and the world through your writing. Thanks to all of you watching who joined us and stayed in and logged on. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's program in the chat or in the email, an email to info@coloradohumanities.org. Suggestions are always welcome. And again, I want to call out Outskirts Press and Colorado Sun. And if you do reach out to them for services or you subscribe to the Sun, please do let them know you're there because they support the Colorado Center for the Book. And please support local businesses by ordering books from the book bar. Our next reading will be the anthology and pictorial category finalists next Wednesday, April 28th at 7 p.m. Winners will be announced at a celebration event online this year, June 26th, beginning at 5 p.m. Stay tuned to our website and social media, and do opt into our newsletter at the bottom of any page at coloradohumanities.org for readings and celebration updates. And stay well. Thanks for joining us.